Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the EcoCiv podcast. I'm Andrew Schwartz, co-founder and vice president of the Institute for Ecological Civilization. And I have a wonderful privilege today to be talking with my new friend out in Amsterdam, Richard van der Laken. He's co-founder of What Design Can Do, based in Amsterdam. Richard's a creative director. He's got a rich background in graphic design and art. Together with his co-founder, Pepijn Zurburg, he established the renowned visual design agency and graphic design collective called Gorilla, as well as What Design Can Do. They have won numerous awards. They've been featured in the permanent collections of galleries, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and then Design Museum in London. So What Design Can Do, it's an international organization that seeks to accelerate the transition to a sustainable, fair, and just society using the power of design. So although they're based in Amsterdam, they've got hubs in São Paulo, Mexico City, Delhi, Nairobi, Tokyo, and only started in 2011. So in the relative scheme of things, a newer organization, but obviously making a great impact. They are initiated, curated, and organized by creatives. So it's a really fun group to be partnering with. They work to empower the global creative community to make a valuable contribution to solving the major problems of our time. And that's exactly what I want to talk with Richard today about, is how in the world design can be used to address the major problems of our time toward a sustainable, fair, and just society. A great vision. So what does it mean? What does it look like? So that's what we're going to discuss. Thanks for being here, Richard.
Thank you for inviting me, Andrew. And thank you so much for this introduction. I guess now the podcast is over because you already told everything.
Yeah. Basically, we're done. So you're good to go. You're off the hook.
Okay, thank you.
No way. That was the easy stuff. This is where it gets hard. You actually have to solve the world's problems in real time.
Yeah.
Just kidding. But you know what you did? You started this organization, What Design Can Do, like 11 years ago. Why? Right? What was its purpose when you started? What kind of problems were you trying to address?
Yeah. Well, what kind of answer would you like to have? The politically correct or the politically incorrect answer?
Definitely the politically incorrect answer. Way more interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then I have to do a few steps back, because I did art school. I went to art school in the city of Utrecht and in the city of Amsterdam, and in that amazing period, because I loved it, I also was always initiating my own projects. So I was not always interested in the assignments that my teachers gave me. And so at the end of my career in art school, I bumped into certain problems because I did not get my points, as they say. You need, I think, 40 points, and I think I only had 20 because I skipped all kinds of lessons. On the other hand, it was, of course, also something that was appreciated by many other teachers who, in that sense, appreciated my initiatives. And so this whole idea of initiating things is something that I have been doing, I think, all my life. I mean, you can even maybe bring it back to high school, where I also organized parties and I did the school newspaper and stuff like that. I always wanted to, and that, of course, all boils down to looking for an audience, so to say. So I think, but now looking back on that, I'm 51 years old now. That's what makes me tick. I need an audience. If not, then I get in trouble. And so that is also something that I have been doing throughout my career with my business partner, Pepijn, or in Dutch, Pepijn. And he and I, in that sense, of course, have the same. We are also complementary. We have a great collaboration, so that really works very well. And so during my career with our design studio, the Design Police, we also did that. So again, parties, always nice to have a party. Weird dinners, magazines, exhibitions, from brilliant to utter bullshit. We did it all. And so
that should be the next title of this podcast, actually, from brilliance to utter bullshit. I love it.
So at a certain moment, you will probably remember there was this financial crisis in the United States, and then a little bit later in Europe. And we used to work a lot in the cultural sector. So for theaters and in the art scene and also design scene. And that was hit severely by the financial crisis. So at a certain moment, we just, to put it very simple, we were running out of work. And that is, in that sense, always a good moment to initiate something new. So I can give you all kinds of beautiful stories about society and blah, blah, but in fact, we did not have anything to do. So we thought maybe we should organize something so that to keep ourselves off the streets. And then we thought, okay, what shall we do then? And over the years, we have been invited for numerous events and conferences and festivals and workshops around the globe. And we were a bit surprised that in a design-driven country like the Netherlands, with such a great reputation on design, such a super high standard and such a super high, well-developed infrastructure and world-famous designers, not to be bragging, but I also consider us as designers that have something to say. So we were also invited around the globe. Why don't we do that here in the Netherlands? Why don't we invite all those super amazing people that we have met in India, in Brazil, in Mexico, in you name it, all those countries. So instead of us going somewhere, let's bring them to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam. And if we do that, then let's not talk about beautiful chairs and funky typefaces, but let's talk about the real role of design, the real position of design and creativity. Or in other words, the impact design has on our society, because that is something that is, from my vision, is something you can never underestimate. And design is omnipresent; it's everywhere. So the sweater that I'm wearing, the phone that I'm using, and not only the product, the phone, but also the software that is on it, the buildings, the streets, the houses, everything is designed. And from that perspective, you can never underestimate the role of design, because design shapes our world and our society. And but on the other hand, we also see that is not perceived in the way it should be perceived. So many people see still, although I do think in the Netherlands and some other countries it's not so strong, but in many contexts, design is seen as something exclusive, or indeed it's about nice stuff, and I really think that's a misunderstanding of what design can give to society, and also in a broader perspective, what designers and the creative industry can bring to society. And so that is in fact how it started. So we organized an event, a conference with speakers from around the globe. And in fact, the only thing we discussed with them, please do not bring us a portfolio talk with all the nice stuff that you did, but please give it a context. Why did you do this? What was the relation with the community, or what? You name it, or with big issues like climate change, or social justice, or inequality, or cultural identity. You name it. It could be everything, as long as it was not only about design as something exclusive. And so to be very honest, we started, and of course we also did not really know what we were doing. We were just organizing this with some friends, and we knew some people from Mexico to London, and from Brazil to China. We thought, let's invite them and see what, and So with a certain sense of naivety, we did that. And that really worked. Again, it was 11 years ago. I think that now it's much more became not a commodity. Many people now, also in the design scene, and when you go to these design weeks around the globe, of course, now everybody's talking about sustainability and stuff like that. And I dare to say that when we started in 2011, that was not so common yet. And so it also resulted in a lot of response. In the Netherlands, of course, there were all kinds of organizations and people that came, but also that wanted to talk to us and wanted to work with us. Also, people from abroad say, "Can you also do this in India?" And then in first instance, I also explained them what that would cost, and then the conversation was over. But throughout the years, of course, that changed.
Right.
And nowadays we are an organization that does not only do events, but we also have an important international challenge program, as we call it. You could say it's sort of a design competition. But the main thing behind everything is our mission, and this is what you already mentioned in the introduction, is empowering the global creative community to work on the issues of our time, so the issues that matter. And then, of course, you immediately come to something like climate change and social justice or inequality. How do we work and live with each other? And we do that in several countries. So nowadays we do have a partnership in Mexico City, in São Paulo, in Nairobi, in Delhi, and in Tokyo. And that gives us the opportunity to really reach out to this global creative community, as I call it. So we are a relatively small organization, but we have some really exciting partnerships and friends around the globe, and that gives us the opportunity to work on those issues. And so that's in a nutshell the whole story. And that
is a great nutshell.
Yeah, and it took us approximately 10 years to do that.
Yeah, but so I mean, you said some amazing things in there. I hope we can pull out a little bit. I mean, one was sort of, I think you said design is omnipresent. So my theological ears perk up. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good one. But design's everywhere, right? It's in everything that we do, and we often just take it for granted. Which I think gets at this question of being good designers or bad designers, which we'll talk about in a second. But you also mentioned that what design can do, organizes challenges and things like that. And I think you recently ran a no waste challenge, which is calling this global community of designers to come for action by coming up with solutions for this sort of massive waste problem. So remind us, what exactly does design have to do with waste?
A lot.
Are you just a bunch of artists drawing pictures and stuff? Like what does that have to do with real problems, Richard?
Yeah, good question. I think it has a lot to do with those big problems. The thing is
that's why we're here, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. No, the thing is that that design and the design community or the design industry, I said it's accelerated a lot in the past few decades, and it also changed in its appearance. So in the early days, it was would almost say it was always connected to engineering or to crafts. And nowadays it's much more than that. It's also all kinds of emotional elements, and it's not only function anymore. But very important part of the design industry is also accelerating consumerism. And I hope that we all understand nowadays that is not per se good, because consumerism is also a massive problem for our environment, for our globe, for our a natural environment that is not designed, so to say. And so although design is the positive things is of course that designers and the industry developed all kinds of products and services that really make our lives better and more convenient. The big downside is that it creates a shitload of waste, and that is unprecedented, and it is growing and it is growing and it is growing. And that of course needs to change. So what we see as waste is really in that sense a design issue. And so it really depends on how we design our products. And also, I always call that the seductive power of design. Design also seduces people to buy. This looks so great, I want to have it. And of course, in the whole marketing model of almost every brand in the world, you want to create that feeling depending on the industry you are in, but for example, in the fashion industry, big brands want to create that feeling of, oh yeah, I want to have that every 6 weeks. So for example, the big brands, I will not mention them, but you will probably understand which big brands I mean, they replace their collection every 6 weeks. I don't know if you really understand what I'm saying, Andrew, but every 6 weeks, that is insane. That means that there's a constant production of new sweaters, t-shirts, caps, jackets, you name it, it keeps on going on. It's like an avalanche of clothing. And of course, it's called fast fashion. So it's also, it's made out of cheap materials. It's not sustainable. Probably a lot of people in Bangladesh or Turkey suffer because they have to make that stuff. So it's a whole chain of events that is super bad for our communities and also for the globe, for our world that we live in. So what we at a certain moment also concluded is that design is part of the solution. Yeah? So if we design smarter, then we can create solutions, but it's also part of the problem. We as designers have been creating big problems in the past few decades. So that also needs to change. And we have to do that hand in hand with the industry. We have to do that hand in hand with governments because they make the rules. If there are no rules, then it's really difficult as a designer to convince your client that you should design and produce in a different way.
Well, yeah, just make less money. It's okay. Your goal should be, yeah.
Exactly. That is, of course, the big issue because people want to make money, and you make money by making things as cheap as possible and selling it for more money. And making things cheap is not very often not so sustainable and not so just for the people on the other side of the globe. And but the good news is, of course, that we can also develop all kinds of products and services that are smart and that are sustainable and in the most ideal situation are circular. And for example, I spoke with some people who work in waste management. They also explained me that they are super here in the Netherlands, extremely innovative industry. But they also said, yeah. If, for example, a piece of packaging, if that is, you have different materials that are glued to each other or that even melted into each other, then you can never take it apart anymore. If you cannot do that, then the only thing you can do is throw it in the oven and it will be burnt. So that is earlier in the process. That is, of course, a design decision. So if you say, well, it's always important that you have these two components that you can separate from each other. Then it can also, in this whole waste management track, be separated from each other, and then these materials can be used again. It is really something that designers can think about and come up with smart and creative solutions. Again, it already happens, but it should happen on a much more massive scale. So for
Yeah,
that
of
reason,
course, then it seems like if
sorry?
I was just thinking, and then if things could be broken down and sort of separated, then they could be replaced. So you don't have to replace the entire unit. You could replace just a piece of it and buy it through repair. But then you're not. So then the company's not selling as many new complete products because people are repairing and reusing and extending the life of their existing.
That can also be a business model. Huh? That is, of course, the whole theory behind circularity, the big re. So reuse, reduce, etc., etc., and repair. Sometimes also refuse. That you don't work with specific materials that are super hard to reuse or to separate from each other, etc., etc. So it demands a new mindset on how to produce.
Exactly right. You got me thinking. Like, is it like a chicken and egg scenario? Is design driving the economy, or is sort of economic goals driving design models, or is it sort of this interplay of both all the time? And anyways, we don't have to get into that, but I
think the last one. I think it goes in both directions. It goes in both directions.
So this is fascinating, and you've a couple times alluded to the fact that so design's been part of the problem, but we hope that it can also be part of the solution. Yes. In conjunction with your no waste challenge, you wrote this provocative opinion piece with this great title, "Haven't we all been bad designers?" Which is such a great question. So I understand that you also had like a video campaign that featured some of the bright stars of the design industry answering that question. Yeah. Could you say a little bit about the campaign and sort of what that question is getting at?
Yeah, now, because as I just explained, that is something that we not discovered. In a way, we already knew that. We already knew that we as a design industry are also part of the problem. We also have a responsibility. Again, next to the designing the products and services, it's also about this seductive power of design, so that you, in that sense, also really accelerate consumption and try to seduce people to buy more and more and more. And when we discuss that with colleagues, everybody says, yeah, sure, no, that is true. But yeah, sometimes I also don't know what to do or how I can change that. So we wanted to be, with this campaign, also be an inspiration for my generation, the slightly older designers, but of course also for younger people. So we asked renowned designers from around the globe to confess their wasteful sins, and that's what they did. And that was, I thought it was super exciting that all these people with such great reputations dared to say, I have been a bad designer. And in these, so it was a video campaign. We made 8 videos with not quite literally designers from around the globe. So, for example, a very well-known designer like Fred Jelly, he's from Rio de Janeiro, from Brazil, super strong and famous product designer. But also, for example, Bruce Mau, also an international thought leader and a graphic designer and communicator. Sally Raby Kane, a fashion designer from Senegal. We had an architect from Japan. We had Alice Rawsthorne, who is a world famous design critic from London. And they all, in fact, as I already mentioned, confessed their wasteful sins, but also explained how they want to change that and how you can change. And what is so nice about that campaign is that you're not only celebrate design and that it's so fantastic as long as we use design. No. Design also, there are also some big flaws, some big mistakes that we made in our industry, and we need to change that. And I think that really triggered people to join our No Waste Challenge program.
That's really cool. So I have to say, I absolutely love the sort of mission behind what design can do. It tugs at my heart, let's say, right? So this idea of trying to accelerate a transition to a more sustainable, fair, just society. Our organization describes that as an ecological civilization. It's that sort of direction of the kind of community, the kind of society we want to live into, which really means redesigning the way that human life is organized. That's a change to sort of the way that we think about things, including products and waste. It also means changing our structures and systems, our policies, our the way that community is organized and the way economy is organized. But what I'm really intrigued by is how you all are using the power of design to address that same goal. And I'd love to hear more about how exactly design is suitable to achieve that vision, that future that we all want. And that maybe even some concrete examples and details. Like, so what are some of the design solutions that you would like to see implemented in society?
Yeah. Now, first of all, of course, my vision is that we need design and creativity to make that transformation happen. That's I really think that's extremely important for several reasons. But the main thing is that because everything starts with imagination, it's also about optimism. Right? You can imagine something and you can start working on that, and that's a really positive action, so to say, really positive act. And I think that we all know nowadays that climate change is happening. We're in a crisis, and that is, of course, not good. But we can change. We know, we all know. All the research shows us that if we are able to change, we can also turn the tide and create a better future. But many people, organizations, companies, governments see this change also as a path that is peppered with all kinds of obstacles, and they don't want to take those obstacles. And by the way, also in many occasions, especially people, communities are not able; they cannot take these hurdles. And we, as a design community or as a creative community, have to show them and make tangible and real that this change can happen, and that it's not only bad. So people are thinking, well, yeah, but I cannot eat meat anymore, and I cannot use I have to drive an electrical car, and I cannot do this, and I cannot shower anymore, and etc. etc. I think it's our responsibility as a creative community to also be that sparkle, that we imagine what this, and also visualize what this future can be. And that is not only something in the far future, of course, that is also happening now. And that is so great about design and designers, that they can really show new innovations and creative ideas that are now also being translated into real action. And again, that is, of course, also what we want to do with What Design Can Do. We are not only talking about it. It's not only something that we show with pictures. No, we also really empower and support designers who do that, who really want to make the change a reality. And as you just asked, if I can give a few examples, yes, of course. For example, we had a great a project from Delhi, from India. You probably know that cities are heating up, especially in warmer areas. So, for example, Delhi is a city that is heating up, and that has to do with the fact big thing is air conditioning. So, of course, it takes a lot of energy, but also air conditioning spits out hot air into the streets. So that means that in some streets, the temperature is already 5 to 6 degrees Celsius higher than in other places. So what they developed, and for that they used an ancient old circular sustainable model, is that when you use pottery and you throw water over pottery, it cools the air. So they made big installations in public space, which are sort of fountains that sprinkle water over huge pottery installations. And that cools the air in the surroundings. And they also developed a smaller version that you can use in your house, in your apartment, in your studio, during your work, etc., etc. And what I also like so much about them is that they don't promise some kind of a fairy tale story. And so no, it will not bring down temperature with 15 degrees Celsius, but it will be able to bring down temperature with 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. So that's a realistic, beautiful, and sustainable solution. Another one which I always like very much is one of my favorites in the No Waste Challenge. Is that it's a Dutch designer. It's a guy who developed the so-called living coffin. And he made a coffin that was made out of mycelium, and mycelium is a fungi, how do you say that in English? Fungi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's a living material. It's a living organism. But the good thing is that it's pretty hard. It's a solid material, so you can mold it in different shapes. So he made a coffin out of that. And the beautiful thing about that is that when you die, and you are and you're put in a coffin and you're buried under the ground, your body and the coffin will disappear in 45 days, and it will leave no trace. So that is, in my opinion, what we also. I think it's a super exciting and how to say that, a weird project, but it also is I think a very inspirational project that shows that we can rethink and redesign everything. So we can redesign and rethink the way we live, but we can also rethink and redesign the way we die.
So cool. I've seen that before. It's really interesting, innovative design. And like you said, it's like, okay, well, it applies to every person on the planet. Right. Everybody's going to have come to that moment where they're like, okay, so now what do we do with this, with our remains? Anyways, that's very, very, I love these creative solutions that are realistic about what impact they can make, but also acknowledging what they're not able to tackle. And I think some of that, you're a big believer in the power of design and making a positive impact in the world. And you've given some examples of how your organization's collaborating with others who are coming up with these great, design solutions. But you also mentioned that there's obstacles. And I think you'd said that there's obstacles that sometimes individual citizens are not capable alone on sort of overcoming, and sometimes that companies or policymakers and politicians aren't really wanting to tackle, or maybe have a struggle with the creative imagination on what a solution really would look like or how to make that transition. But I expect that the design community also has some obstacles, right? So could you say a little bit about some of the obstacles that creatives are facing, or maybe about how you personally, as a designer yourself, try to overcome some of these obstacles?
Yeah. Well, I think in a way I already mentioned it before. The danger is that people still perceive design as something trivial. And so we as an organization very often first have to explain that design is much more than that. And then we have to take the next hurdle, and then is that also show and explain and in a way prove that design is really important in making that transition. So sometimes it's a bit difficult that you have to do a sort of a two-step hurdles. And
right.
So that is for us really difficult. Also, when you look, for example, at this waste challenge, for example, the no waste challenge, when you look at circular design, it's really tough. It's not easy. It's also not per se cheaper. So people, organizations, companies, and governments must be willing and able to invest And that brings me to a bigger issue, and that is, of course, it sounds very cliche, but that is indeed money, capital. What we do is that we co-develop and help designers with their initiatives and organizations to grow and have impact. So you could also say, well, what we do is that we help startups. And as you maybe know, when you're talking about a startup, you first have to invest in those startups. And sometimes very often you need to invest quite heavily. And that is still a big thing. We all know that there's a lot of money going around in the world, but very often they do not find that this money doesn't find its way to design and to design-driven innovation. So it's very often about tech, about technology, or about engineering, but it's difficult to bring that money to design-driven innovation. So that is one of the big things that we until now still are confronted with. So how we do that is, of course, also how we try to tackle that is, of course, campaigning, or as they say, advocacy, and the campaign I just talked about with the I've been a bad designer. That is, of course, part of it. We campaign for a specific project. But on the other hand, we of course also have bigger goals. We want to reach out to the many and also be able to influence, so to say, decision makers. And that sounds like an abstract person, this decision maker. But of course, these people are people in governments, the management in companies, and that's a long way. That's not easy.
So I'll just say I'm notoriously bad at art, but I'm not notorious about it because nobody knows, because nobody, anyways, I mean, stick figures, I struggle with stick figures, right? I can't draw things. But so when you're talking about the design community and all these great skills that they have for addressing environmental and social injustices, I'm like, that's great. What can I do, right? How can I help? And I'm under the impression that you actually would disagree with what I just said, that I'm not a designer because I don't have artistic skills. You actually see a designer in everyone. So if that's the case, tell me exactly how I'm a designer and what people like me can do to support this sort of creative global community for design solutions.
I think that you could, because I want to make a distinction between everybody is a designer and professional designers. I do think that there's a very important difference.
Nobody's putting my work up in the Museum of Modern Art, right? Yeah, that's fair.
I really like this phrase, and it's coined by many design leaders and creative leaders, so to say. And I agree that in a way everybody is a designer. But there's also really a big distinction between the normal citizen or consumer and professional designer. And so at the end of the road, professional designers have an issue, and that needs to be solved. And 9 out of 10 times, that's an issue that they have for a client. So, okay, I want to sell this, or I have this product, but this and this and this doesn't work. So how can I make it more attractive, or how can I make it more functional? How does it work better, etc., etc. And because at the end of the road, it needs to have a purpose for, how to say it, as I mentioned before, in our consumption-driven society. And on the other side, the citizen, the consumer, is the one that uses that. But so at the end of the road, I would also say, as a citizen, whether it's Andrew or Richard, we just have to make decisions that matter, that are thoughtful. And again, I can only underline that for me, and I assume that it also counts for you, it's easier than for many other people who have a lack of money or a lack of access, or the context, it makes it much more difficult for them. On the other hand, as a citizen or consumer, you also have power, and I think that lies in the fact that you can gather and hold each other's hands and demand things from the government, but also from companies. I mean, if we all say we don't want to use plastic anymore, then at a certain moment it will stop. But as long as we don't do that, as long as we do not unite and organize, then it will continue happening. So that I think that's an important role, and we can, as a community, design that movement, so to say. And again, for professional designers, it is extremely important that we think better about what we design, how we design it, and why we design it. And so
I would say the
distinction between those, the fact that everybody is a designer and that you also have professional designers.
That's a very helpful distinction. I will stop referring to myself as a professional designer on my resume. So I think what you just said about professional designers have to think about what they design and how and why and all those sorts of things. And it sounds like the same is true for unprofessional designers, the consumers, right? What are we consuming, how, why, and making choices that fit with our values and our goals. So on both ends, right, from production and consumption, and sort of the design that's throughout that process, there's decisions to be made.
Yeah, but again, if I am allowed to make another statement, I also think it's important that we do not put all the responsibility, or I said it, in the previous years. For example, I mean, only here in the Netherlands, the government also had made big campaigns about a clean environment starts with you, and so addressing the citizen. And I really think that this is not fair, because for many, as I mentioned before, for many citizens, and citizens are also consumers, they are caught in a trap. I mean, when you have a simple job and you don't earn that much money, it is really difficult to buy the right stuff, because here in the Netherlands and also in the United States and probably around the globe, a Big Mac is cheaper than buying healthy food in the supermarket. So as long as that is still the case, then then citizens are sort of their space of movement is very narrow. We just discussed the fashion industry. As long as you can still buy a T-shirt for €5 and a sweater for €10, you cannot ask from people with a small budget to buy sustainable fashion that is twice or triple the price. So in that sense, the change has to come from companies and governments. Governments have to make policy and regulations, and companies just have to be more thoughtful and really take responsibility instead of only greenwashing, as many of them are still doing. And again, absolutely, on all those levels, what I just mentioned, design plays a role. So on the side of the citizen and the consumer, and also on the side of the companies and on the side of the governments. Making policy and also how to communicate that in a proper way with the people in a country is something that designers and creatives and in communication and in strategy, etc., it's so vital and so important. And again, when it comes to companies, just design better things.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, I can't agree with you more. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I keep thinking about the sort of, I don't know, meta perspective, redesigning design, right? Or it's like what design can do for design, like, I don't know, sort of applying to itself, which is also kind of fun.
Sure, that's also important. Again, because we are when you talk about climate change, and by the way, not only about climate change, but also about big social issues like inequality. It's all about the systems we live in. And and that needs to change. And it also means that the way we used to design things doesn't work anymore. It's a broken system, and that needs to change. So on one hand, you need design to design a new system. And on the other hand, design itself also needs to change.
So that last point is, I think, so vital, and it's so challenging. The idea that's really at the heart of it, it's not simply just, well, consumers need to take shorter showers, and then that's going to solve all the world's problems, but that there actually are these sort of fundamental changes that need to happen at the base of what are the systems of society, right? Our very sort of paradigms that we use to organize ourselves and how we understand what it means to be human and living in relation to one another and the rest of the natural world. And I mean, these are big kinds of changes. And I feel like sometimes that scope of where change needs to be happening can be overwhelming for people. It makes them feel like, well, I can't affect, global economic systems. I can't change the way that clothes are made across the world. Like I'm just an individual. What can I do? And that people feel overwhelmed by that. And then they, that overwhelming sense falls to despair. And then they sort of lose out on the hope that anything could be better. This is the system that we have, and imagining a new system seems like a pie in the sky sort of idealism. But I think that hope is so important, because without hope, it's like, well, what's the point, right? But I also want to make sure that we have realistic hope. And I'm under the impression that you at What Design Can Do, you base yourselves on a pillar of creative optimism.
Yes.
Could you say what that is and how you stay motivated despite the massive scale of challenges that we face?
Yeah, sure. Now, first of all, as you already mentioned, sometimes it can be so overwhelming. My God, what can I do as an individual? Nothing. And in a way, you could say that's true, but on the other hand, it's of course also not true. But for that reason, we also always focus on, we are talking about global issues, but we also want to focus on local solutions, so that the solution is not abstract. So that what you can do is real, you can touch it, you can feel it, you can understand it. And I think that's very important. So in that sense, it does start with yourself, with your family, with your neighborhood, whatever. So the small things that you do really matter, because when we all do it, then it will mean a massive change. For us, as What Design Can Do, we of course represent the creative community, and we want to support and help and make change happen with design. I think that design and designing is by nature something very positive and optimistic, and because you're always working on something new. There's a problem and you want to solve that or come up with alternatives. And that in itself is always very optimistic. It's always about the future and how we can create new things. And we create these new things because we want to make our lives better and more convenient or more fair, etc., etc. So from that perspective, I think it's always, for us, important to underline this sense of optimism. Of course, I'm not sure if we're going to make it, and if we're going to succeed, and if we're really going to turn the tide or bend the curve or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I cannot sit on my hands and do nothing. We just have to do something, and I hope it matters, and I hope it will make the change. Will make the change happen that we all hope for. So that's a sense of. On one hand, you have to be realistic, and on the other hand, also have to be optimistic, because otherwise we can also stop and do nothing.
Yeah, I share your hope that we can actually turn this around and do something, but What confidence level do I have that we're going to meet all of our social and environmental challenges? Maybe we won't talk about that, but so you say, okay, so you can't sit on your hands and do nothing, and you are not sitting on your hands doing nothing. You're doing a lot. Tell me about what's next on the horizon for what design can do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have all kinds of programs and activities running. So as a follow-up of the No Waste Challenge, we are now developing the Circular Design Challenge. So that's in that sense very closely connected. But now really focusing on circularity. Yeah? So as I already mentioned, the many re's, so to say, from reuse to refuse. So that's what we will do in the coming months, preparing that, and in autumn we will launch this international challenge program again. On a longer term, my mission is again to empower creative people, and we want to do that on a global level. So for me, it is important that we are able to keep on connecting, creating new partnerships, so that we do not only operate in the cities that I already mentioned, but that in the most positive sense of the word, that it will also become a virus that you can find everywhere, and that we infect people with the power of design on a global level. That is, of course, at the end of the road, what I want to achieve, because again, I think it's so important that we use imagination and creativity to change the world, because then you can do it in a positive and optimistic way, and otherwise people will feel abandoned and left behind. And that is so important, that we include everybody in a positive and optimistic way.
Absolutely. So for any of those who are listening who want to know more about Richard's work and what design can do, and if they're interested in partnering with what design can do and joining this movement, this viral movement, if you want to be infected with creativity, I think the best way probably is to go to the website, whatdesigncando.com. And connect with them there. Of course, there's the recent book, Never Waste a Good Crisis. And I think you said in June 3rd, maybe, you've got the famous design festival organized in Amsterdam. So anybody in the Europe area who wants to join that sounds like a great opportunity. Also details at the website, whatdesigncando.com. Richard, this has been an awesome conversation. It's wonderful talking to you and listening to you and being inspired by you with what design can do, what design is doing, and what you're doing. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your time.
And thank you so much. It was a great conversation indeed.